Hey everyone, it's Emily, and today I'm going to show you how to throw on the potter's wheel. You'll need a bucket of water, a sponge, a wooden knife tool, a needle tool, and a wire tool. And we'll also need some clay. I'm going to grab about 1 pound. I recommend this for anyone who's new to the wheel or still getting used to it, anywhere between 1 to 2 pounds, which is usually about the size of like a baseball. So you'll see I measure mine out on the scale. If you don't have a scale, just kind of eyeball it. The first thing that we want to do with our clay is prepare it through a technique called wedging. So this is a similar motion to kneading and basically just helps align the clay particles as well as removing any air bubbles, which just sets our clay up for being a lot easier to work with later on the wheel. To do this, you'll use the heel of your right hand, angled at about 45 degrees to the right, and you want to push down and forward into the clay. Using your left hand, then you'll lift the clay straight up and press down and forward again. You'll see my left hand starts to come in during the pressing motion, and while I'm applying like a small amount of pressure with my left hand, the right hand is really doing most of the work. Your clay should start to create a bit of a cone or wedge shape, and you'll want to repeat this at least 30 times, even more if you notice a lot of air in the clay or if there's a big difference in moisture levels, like one spot is maybe a little bit softer or stiffer than the rest. Our goal is basically just that chunk of clay becomes a nice even consistency throughout. So as you near the end of your wedging, you'll want to create a tighter cone shape. To do that, just gradually ease up on the amount of pressure that you apply after each wedge, and you'll see it kind of starts wrapping the tail around that clay. Now I'll give the bottom a quick pat on the table and start creating a bit more of a teardrop shape using a cupped hand to pat that bottom nice and round. When you're working on the wheel, it's important to understand the relationship between speed and pressure, and a good general rule is the more pressure your hands are applying, the faster you want your wheel to go. The less pressure you apply, the slower. So to give you a sense, this is what full speed looks like on my wheel versus half speed and just barely on. And all of this is being controlled by my foot pedal. I'll give you a few markers and note the key places to change your speed throughout the demo. All right, let's get some clay on here. So aiming for the middle circle on my wheel, I'll take my cone, smack it down, and scoot it if it doesn't land right in the center. From here, I'll start slowly spinning my wheel, and with my hands on either side, using the palm of my hand as if I was giving somebody a high five, I'll start patting down and in on the clay to continue forming that cone shape. This is called pat centering, and it helps get the clay in the middle of the wheel as well as making sure that it's really stuck on. And next I'm going to grab some water with my sponge and cover my clay. This just helps reduce the friction between our hands and the clay as we're throwing. First step is centering. So I want to take my left hand using the heel of my hand, pressing on the side at about 7 o'clock if our wheel was a clock, and then using my right hand, using the side of my hand, I'm going to be pressing down on my clay. I'll start by spinning my wheel a little over half speed, since this is when I'm applying the most amount of pressure, and anchoring my elbows on my thighs, which helps keep your hands stable. I'll start applying pressure with both hands. So my clay is starting to get a little dry underneath my hands. You can see it's kind of dull. I'll grab some more water, and you'll see me grab for water throughout the process, just keeping that friction down. You might be surprised as to how much force you have to use to get the clay to go where you want it to, so don't be afraid to kind of push it around. Don't let the clay push you. To give you a sense of what's happening underneath my hands, if I were to apply pressure with just the side of my hand, my clay is going to get taller and thinner, versus if I come down with just my top hand, it's going to get flatter and wider. So ideally what we're looking for is like a hamburger patty shape, and you just want to play around with the different pressures on either hand. The goal when you're centering is to get that clay spinning evenly around the center point of the wheel. So to give you a visual point, I'll make a little dot here in the very center, and you can see that the clay is rotating evenly around that dot. It's kind of equal on all sides. Versus if we knock something off center, so this is off center, I'll go ahead and get our dot squared back up in the very middle of our wheel, you can see that it kind of starts to rock around that center point, more like a hula hoop, right? One side is much, much thicker than the other. So to get that back on center, I'm just gonna apply a lot of pressure with my side hand, staying really steady, really strong, until that clay stops kind of pushing back against me and I feel like I've got a little bit more control. So I've got this back on center and my piece is wider than it is tall, which is a great start. So once my piece of clay is centered, I'm gonna start opening it up. To do this, I'm gonna add some more water, and then using the thumb on my left hand, I'm gonna start pressing down. My right hand will come on top for extra support and stability. So just with that fingertip, I'm gonna start pressing down in the very center, and you see that we start to create a little bit of negative space. If your thumb is too short, you might find that you need to switch over to your middle finger and ring finger to continue that downward motion. Now you don't want to press all the way down to the wheel, otherwise we won't have a bottom to our piece. So one easy way to check as you're working is to stop your wheel, grab the needle tool, and push this through the bottom of your piece until it hits the wheel. Slide your finger down to where the clay meets the tool, pull it out, and that's the distance. I know it's kind of hard to see in the video, but ideally you want about 1/4 of an inch on the bottom of your piece. I'll add some more water to my piece. Then from here, I'm gonna start creating a flat bottom using my middle finger and ring finger, the very fingertips, and positioning my hand at about 6 o'clock with my right hand coming on top to stay stable. I'm gonna start pulling my left hand directly towards me, really focusing on creating that flat bottom and not pulling out farther than where the clay is attached on the wheel. You'll likely either end up with lines like on the bottom of my piece or some unevenness on the bottom of yours. So grab your sponge, squeeze out all the water, and then using my left hand, I'm gonna start applying pressure to the bottom of my piece, starting from the center, working my way out to the corner of the walls, and then just working back towards that center point. A majority of the pressure is coming from my middle finger, and this just helps compress the clay and even everything back out. When I was doing this, I noticed some cracking along the rim of my piece, so I'm gonna take a damp sponge again, fold it in half, and then in that crease, press down and around on the clay. Again, this will compress all that clay back together, get rid of any cracks, and make it happy, which is what we want. Now we'll move on to the very last step, which is pulling our clay up. At this point, we've got sort of this donut of clay around the bottom, and we're gonna start moving that so that it becomes taller and thinner. During this step, you'll want to slow your wheel down to about half speed. I'll add some more water to get going, and then I really want to work on the right-hand side of my piece from here on out. So we started with centering on the left, moved to the middle for opening up, and now I'm working on the right to pull up. Using my pointer finger and my middle finger, I'll bend those and start applying pressure in between the first digit of my finger, so that first knuckle there. Using the very tips of my fingers, I'm going to rest those on the bottom of my piece and on the head of my wheel, a little bit more water, and then right hand's coming on for support, and I'll start, like I said, just applying pressure between those two fingers. It's really subtle, but you might be able to see that my piece is getting taller, and once I've kind of flattened out that donut shape and the walls are even, I'm going to slowly start moving my fingers up to the very top of my piece and slowly take my hands away. My rim got a bit uneven, so I'll take my sponge, fold it in half, and compress it just by wrapping that around the top and pressing down. From here, I'll start another pull. So adding a little bit more water, same thing, fingers on the very bottom, and I'll slowly start to pull up and in towards the center just a little bit. You almost want to imagine that you're pulling your hand towards your left shoulder. So you're working a little bit on a diagonal. And after the pull, I'll go ahead and compress my rim again. Now that our piece is getting a little bit taller, we're not going to be able to work with just the one hand, so we're going to switch to working with two. I'll apply pressure with my middle fingers, so my left hand will go on the inside of my piece, my right hand will be on the outside. And the biggest thing is you want to connect your hands together, so I prefer to do this at my wrist, basically wherever feels comfortable. Sometimes folks will use the side of their pointer finger. Again, play around with different things and see what feels the best or most successful for you. So same idea, we're just starting at the very bottom of the piece and slowly working our way all the way up to the top, and even releasing that pressure just a little bit towards the very end. I know this part specifically is a little bit tricky to see on the video, and here I try to give you a bit better of a view, but it's still really hard once my wrists come together to see what my fingers are doing. To give you an idea, this hand position that I showed you earlier in the video is exactly what my hands look like. They're just moving up slowly. So hopefully that gives you a better sense of what's happening. One thing to be mindful of is as you start collecting water in the bottom of your piece, every once in a while you just want to soak that up. So I'll use a damp sponge, stick it in the bottom, and get rid of all of that. For the last pull, I'm going to use a sponge on my outside hand. I find that it distributes the pressure a little bit more widely than just using your finger. So if you find that you're having a lot of problems with your hands digging into the clay, it's really hard to keep them steady, give it a shot with a sponge and see if that helps. Once your clay is thinned out, the piece is looking how you want it to be. Maybe we failed miserably, that's okay. We're gonna start working towards the steps of taking our piece off of the wheel. And the first thing I wanna do is get rid of this little flare that's happening at the bottom using my wooden knife tool. So I'm gonna hold the tool with this sort of angled side facing my piece, and working on the right hand side, I'm going to be using the point to slowly start pressing down into the clay. And I'm not starting all the way from the edge, I'm starting in just a bit. You'll see that this is a really slow movement. I don't want to put my tool all the way down to the wheel head from the get-go, otherwise it's just too much stress on the clay. So I slowly work down until I hit that wheel, and then to remove the extra clay, I'll use that angled side pressed flat on my wheel. So I'm going to bring the point towards me, kind of slice through that clay, and slowly spin my wheel to scrape it away, stopping every once in a while to remove any buildup from my knife. Now to do some basic shaping, I'm going to turn this tool around and use the totally flat side. And I'm going to rest the point on my wheel, keeping that kind of straight up and down. And my inside hand is going to slowly start pressing that clay to stretch it to meet the tool. This will give me a nice straight-walled cylinder, and for anyone who's just starting out or getting used to the wheel, this is a great form to aim for. Not only is it simple, but it's also really the basis for any other kind of shape that you want to make. Alright, and this is the end. Here comes the moment of truth, taking our piece off the wheel. So I'm going to grab for my wire tool, wrap my fist around it, pull it to the ends, and wrap the wire around my fingers 1 or 2 times. I'm going to use my thumbs, as if you were flossing, to keep it really taut against the wheel, starting away from me, and then I'm going to pull all the way through the bottom towards me. I'll give that wire tool a quick clean, set that down, and then I'm going to grab a wooden wear board to transfer my wet piece onto. Let's pause right here because one thing I forgot to film was before I do this, I gave my hands a quick rinse to get all that slip off and dried them with a towel. This will help your hands stick to the clay better while you're taking your piece off, and you won't have to apply as much pressure. And with clean hands, we will move on. So to take your piece off the wheel, you're going to cup your hands and lightly apply even pressure across your entire hand. I'm going to put the heels of my hands together, again, applying really even pressure throughout that whole piece, keeping it round. And I'm going to start by peeling it up with the heels of my hands and then following through with the rest. One fun way to see what's happening on the inside of your piece and to also mark your progress is to cut your cylinders in half. So I'll take my wire tool, just starting at the top here, and slice through the entire thing. This is also a great way for you to see what areas you might need to pay more attention to that you can't necessarily identify just through touch. So let's see what my piece looks like. And already the bottom is pretty thin, especially towards the center, so that's something I'll be careful of next time. Not going down quite as far as I'm opening up my piece. Aside from that, this piece is looking pretty good. The corners have a nice 90-degree angle, and the walls are fairly even all the way up, if not a little bit thicker at the bottom than they are at the top. So with a bit thicker of a bottom, this cylinder would have been textbook and is what you want to aim for when you're practicing. Since I've cut my piece in half and can't use it, I'll recycle this clay just by smushing it all together, letting it sit out for just a little bit to dry, and re-wedge it so I can try again. Throwing on the wheel definitely takes a lot of practice and can be pretty frustrating when you're first starting out, but hang in there and keep trying. You'll see slow improvements, and they're definitely something to celebrate. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out the other WeFly videos, as well as follow Firebird Community Arts on social media and their website to stay up to date.